Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've been fishing these waters since I was 14 years old. Lobster mostly, but crab and groundfish when the season's right. My father taught me the trade, and his father taught him, going back 4 generations to when my great-grandfather first settled in Crestwood Bay with nothing but a rowboat and a dream of making a living from the sea. My name is Sawyer Briggs. I'm 48 years old, and I operate a 40-foot lobster boat called the Anne Marie, named after my mother, who passed when I was 22. I know these waters the way I know my own body. Every current, every shoal, every place where the lobsters like to hide. I've watched the tides come in and go out more times than I could count, and I've never once questioned that rhythm until the morning the tide went out and didn't come back. I woke before dawn like I always do, made my coffee, pulled on my boots, and drove down to the harbor. The sky was just starting to lighten in the east, that grey-blue color that comes right before sunrise. I parked my truck in my usual spot and walked toward the dock. That's when I stopped. The harbor was empty. Not empty of boats. The boats were still there. But they weren't floating. They were sitting on their keels in the mud, tilted at awkward angles, their hulls exposed like beached whales. The water had pulled back further than I'd ever seen it, leaving behind a landscape of wet sand and scattered debris. I stood there for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Low tide can be dramatic in Maine, exposing rocks and seaweed, and sometimes the remains of old wrecks. But this was something else entirely. The waterline was hundreds of yards from where it should have been, and the exposed seafloor stretched toward the horizon like a wasteland. Other fishermen started arriving, gathering at the edge of the dock, staring in silence at what lay before them. Nobody knew what to say. We'd all been doing this for decades, and none of us had ever seen anything like it. Earthquake, someone said. Must have been an earthquake somewhere. This is what happens before a tsunami. The water pulls back and then comes rushing in. We all knew that. Every coastal fisherman knows the warning signs. When the tide retreats too far, you run for high ground and wait for the wave. So we retreated. We climbed the hill above the harbor and watched the horizon, waiting for the wall of water that would come crashing back. But hours passed, and the water didn't return. By noon, the Coast Guard had issued advisories. By evening, scientists were arriving from universities, setting up equipment on the dock, taking measurements and samples. The news crews came too, their vans clogging the narrow streets of Crestwood Bay, their cameras pointed at the empty harbor. The explanations came fast, but none of them fit. Seismic activity, they said, but there had been no earthquake. Gravitational anomalies, they suggested, but the moon's position couldn't account for it. A rare tidal phenomenon, perhaps. Something that happened once in 1,000 years. But the water should have come back by now. It always came back. That was the nature of the tide, the eternal rhythm of the sea pulling away and returning, pulling away and returning. Not this time. By nightfall, the tide had receded even further. I stood on the dock, now a wooden platform extending over dry, cracked mud, and looked out at the exposed sea floor. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red, and the light caught on things that shouldn't have been visible. Rocks I'd never seen. The rusted skeleton of an old fishing boat that must have sunk decades ago. The strange, dark terrain that lay beyond, stretching toward where the water used to be. I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. Those nights when the fog rolled in so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and the foghorn moaned like something in pain. Fear. Genuine fear of the ocean, or of what the ocean had been hiding. The water continued to recede over the following days. What had been ocean was now exposed seabed, mudflats and rock formations, the skeletons of old ships, marine debris accumulated over centuries. The smell was overwhelming. Fish and crabs and lobsters dying in vast numbers, stranded on the exposed floor with nowhere to go. I walked out onto the newly revealed land with some of the other fishermen. We told ourselves we were salvaging what we could, collecting the dying lobsters before they spoiled. But really, we were exploring. We couldn't help ourselves. The further we walked, the stranger things became. The first few 100 yards were normal enough. The kind of seafloor you'd expect, littered with shells and seaweed and the occasional lost anchor. But beyond that, the terrain started to change. The rock formations were too regular, too geometric. I'm not a scientist, but I've been looking at rocks my whole life. The granite of the Maine coast, the basalt of the deeper waters, and I know what natural formations look like. These didn't look natural. They looked shaped, arranged, almost constructed. I knelt down and brushed away a layer of sediment. Beneath the mud and debris, there was something else, a surface, dark and smooth, unlike any stone I'd ever seen. I told myself it was volcanic rock, some kind of underwater lava flow that had cooled into unusual patterns. The ocean floor is full of strange things, formations created by processes we don't fully understand. But the deeper we went, the harder that explanation became to believe. By the end of the first week, the ocean had pulled back miles from its original shoreline. The news was reporting that this wasn't just happening in Maine. It was global. Ocean levels were dropping everywhere, coastlines expanding, harbors draining around the world. The water wasn't evaporating, wasn't being absorbed into the ground. It was simply receding, pulling away from land as if drawn by some invisible force. Scientists theorized that the water was being concentrated in the deep ocean trenches, drawn towards the abyssal depths by forces they couldn't identify. Others suggested changes in Earth's rotation, gravitational anomalies from space, exotic physics that no one fully understood. But no one could explain where the water was going or why. I joined an expedition of fishermen and locals walking out to see what had been uncovered. We brought water and food, expecting a long trek across the exposed floor. What we found made several of us turn back before we'd gone a mile. Beneath the layer of sediment and marine debris, there was a surface. Not rock, not sand, something else entirely. It was vast and dark, so smooth it almost seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and it extended in every direction, far beyond what we could see, disappearing under the remaining water in the distance. The surface was covered in patterns, not random, not decorative. They looked functional, like the circuits on a computer board or the veins in a leaf. Lines and channels running in precise configurations, connecting nodes and junctions that suggested purpose. I knelt down and pressed my palm against the surface. It was warm, not hot, but noticeably warmer than the air around it. And I could feel something through my hand, a vibration, faint but steady, like the hum of a distant engine. Horace Whitley, a retired geology professor who'd come along out of curiosity, fell to his knees beside me. His face had gone white. "This isn't possible," he said. "This shouldn't be here." "What is it?" "I don't know, but it's not natural. The ocean floor doesn't look like this. It's supposed to be basalt and sediment, volcanic rock and accumulated debris." He ran his hand over the surface, his fingers tracing the patterns. "This is manufactured. This is built." "Built by what?" Horace looked up at me with eyes that had seen something they couldn't process. "I don't know. But the ocean wasn't just water, Sawyer. It was a cover, a blanket, hiding whatever this is from the surface world." The news spread fast after that. Research teams arrived from everywhere: universities, government agencies, military organizations. They set up camps on the exposed seabed, brought in equipment and personnel, began studying the strange surface that had been hidden beneath our oceans for longer than anyone could guess. I served as a guide for some of them. My knowledge of the local waters, now local terrain, proved useful for navigating the transformed landscape. And I wanted to understand. I needed to understand what I'd been sailing over my entire life. The scientists confirmed what we'd suspected. The surface was artificial, composed of materials that didn't exist in nature, arranged in patterns that suggested deliberate design. And it was enormous. Based on satellite imagery and the rate of exposure, the surface appeared to cover most of the ocean floor worldwide. Not just here, not just in the Atlantic, but everywhere. Every ocean, every sea. 70% of Earth's surface had been concealing something that no one had ever known was there. One of the researchers, a woman named Dr. Irene Calloway, shared her analysis with me one evening. "The surface isn't inert," she said. "It has properties we can't explain. It generates heat from some internal source. It vibrates at frequencies we can barely detect. And it's completely resistant to any kind of analysis. Our cutting tools break. Our drills fail to penetrate. Nothing leaves a mark. What do you think it is?" She hesitated, looking out at the vast dark expanse stretching toward the horizon. "I think it's a shell," she said finally. "We're standing on the outside of something, like ants walking on an egg." "An egg? Or a container, a vessel, something built to hold and transport?" She shook her head. "I don't know what's inside, Sawyer. But whatever it is, it's been here for a very long time, and now the water that was keeping it covered is being removed." "Removed by what?" Dr. Calloway didn't answer. I don't think she knew. The ocean continued to recede, and as it did, more of the surface was revealed. The exposed area grew warmer each day. The temperature on the former seabed climbed steadily, making exploration increasingly difficult. Steam rose from puddles of remaining seawater, creating an eerie fog across the dark terrain. Some researchers theorized that the water had been keeping the surface cool, regulating its temperature. Without the ocean's cooling effect, whatever lay beneath was beginning to warm up. I stopped going out onto the exposed floor. The heat was too intense, and there was something else, something harder to articulate, a feeling of wrongness, of standing somewhere I wasn't meant to be. I spent my days at the harbor instead, looking out at the transformed landscape, watching the shimmer of rising heat above the dark expanse. In my dreams, I saw the surface from above. I saw the patterns that covered it, the lines and channels spreading across the exposed floor like a vast network, and I saw them beginning to glow. I woke from those dreams with the certainty that something was about to happen, something the removal of the ocean was preparing for. On the 25th day, the surface began to move. It was subtle at first, vibrations that showed up on seismographs around the world, tremors felt by people standing on the exposed floor. Then sections of the surface began to shift, plates sliding against each other, gaps opening between them, revealing something beneath. Light spilled from the gaps, a pale glow that wasn't sunlight, wasn't fire, wasn't anything I had words for. The structure was opening, its components separating, showing us what had been hidden inside the shell. I watched from the coast of Crestwood Bay as tendrils of light, or something like light, reached up from the widening gaps toward the sky. The heat was intense now, even from miles away. I could feel it on my face like standing too close to a bonfire. Dr. Calloway found me on the dock, her face streaked with sweat and exhaustion. "We need to evacuate," she said. "Everyone needs to get away from the coast." "What's happening?" She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Something parked this here," she said, "covered it with water to keep it cold, to keep it dormant. And now the water is being removed because someone is ready to wake it up." "Wake up what?" But she was already moving, helping coordinate the evacuation, and I never got my answer. On the 30th day, the structure began to rise. Not explosively, not dramatically, slowly, steadily, like something massive emerging from a long sleep. The ground shook as millions of tons of material lifted away from the planet's crust. The remaining ocean water, what little was left, drained into the gaps left behind, disappearing into darkness. I stood on the hill above Crestwood Bay and watched the thing that had been hidden beneath our seas reveal itself. It wasn't a single object. It was a network, a system, countless components working together. As they rose, they separated into sections, each one the size of a continent, each one lifting into the sky with deliberate purpose. They passed through the atmosphere, blocking out the sun, casting shadows across the entire eastern seaboard. The air filled with sound, not a roar, not an explosion, but a hum, a vibration that resonated in my bones. I watched pieces of Earth's hidden cargo rise toward the stars. The departure continued for days. The sections of the structure ascended at a steady pace, rising through the atmosphere, passing through the space where clouds should have been. Some remained connected by filaments of light. Others separated entirely, following independent paths into the void. The world watched. There was nothing else to do. No way to stop it. No way to understand it. No way to do anything except witness something beyond human comprehension. Researchers offered theories about what we were seeing. The structure was a fleet, they said, a convoy. Countless vessels stored on Earth like ships in a harbor. The oceans had been placed over them as preservation, as concealment, as protection from some unknown threat. Earth had been a waypoint, a storage facility, a place where something vast could wait in safety until it was needed. And now, after billions of years of waiting, it had been called back to duty. I thought about my grandfather, my great-grandfather, all the generations who fished these waters. They thought the ocean was their inheritance, their livelihood, their connection to something eternal. But the ocean was never really theirs. It was just a cover, a disguise, a way to hide what was really important. The fish, the tides, the storms and calms, all of it was incidental, a side effect of what lay beneath. Humanity built civilizations around the coastlines, economies on the shipping lanes, cultures on the rhythm of the tides. And none of it mattered to whatever placed the structure here, whatever covered it with water, whatever had now taken it back. In the weeks following the departure, the remaining water redistributed across the scarred basins. The seas were shallower now, smaller, concentrated in different configurations. Coastlines had changed dramatically. Former beaches were now cliff sides. Former harbors were now dry canyons. The map of the world was being redrawn. Marine life had been devastated. Millions of species extinct. Ecosystems destroyed. The fishing industry was gone, not just damaged, but eliminated entirely. My boat, the Anne-Marie, sat in what used to be the harbor. There was water now, shallow and silty, but it wasn't the ocean I knew. I could sail again, technically, but there was nothing to fish for, no ecosystem to support my livelihood. Everything I'd built my life around was gone, not destroyed, just removed, taken away like furniture from a rented house. Researchers studied the scars left on the ocean floor in the months that followed. The marks revealed something about the structure's nature. It hadn't just been resting on the seabed, it had been connected to it. Channels and conduits had run deep into Earth's crust, drawing something from the planet's core. Energy, heat, something more abstract. The structure had been feeding, in some sense, drawing sustenance from Earth itself. That was what the ocean was really hiding. Not just the structure, but the process. The slow drain of something essential from our planet, something that Earth would never recover. The departure wasn't a rescue or a retrieval. It was the end of a process, the completion of a purpose. We had been the surface of a fuel tank, fishing in the coolant, building cities on the cab. And now the tank was empty. I stayed in Crestwood Bay when most others left. The coast had changed, the water had changed, everything had changed. But this was still my home. I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. I took the Anne-Marie out sometimes, sailing the shallow, silty waters. Not fishing, there was nothing to catch. Just sailing, maintaining my connection to the sea, even if the sea was no longer what it was. The boat felt different on the transformed water. The swells were smaller, the currents weaker. The vast wild power of the ocean had been diminished, tamed by the loss of so much volume. But it was still water. It still moved beneath my hull. It still smelled of salt and carried me where I wanted to go. That had to be enough. One night, months after the departure, I sat on the dock and looked up at the stars. The sky was clearer now. Something about the changed atmosphere, the reduced evaporation from the smaller oceans. I could see more stars than I'd ever seen before, a river of light flowing across the darkness. Somewhere out there, the structure was still traveling, still moving toward whatever destination had called it. I wondered where it was going, what it would do when it got there. I wondered if anyone would ever know. I wondered if there were other worlds like Earth, other planets with oceans concealing cargo, other fuel stations waiting to be emptied. I wondered if the things that built the structure, that placed it here, that covered it with water and waited billions of years, were still out there, and if they would ever come back. The tide came in as I sat there, weakly, against the transformed shore. The water level rose a few feet, then stopped, then began to recede again. It wasn't the same. It would never be the same. The rhythm was different now. The range diminished. But it was still a tide, still the ocean breathing in and out, even if its lungs were smaller. I watched the water lap against the dock and remembered the sea as it was, as I thought it was. I spent my whole life believing I knew the ocean. I understood its moods and its rhythms. I read its surface and predicted its behavior. I thought we had an understanding, the sea and I. I was wrong. Everyone was wrong. The ocean was never ours. It was never anyone's. It was just a cover, a disguise, a way to hide something that was always going to leave. Now it's gone, and the truth is exposed, and the world has to live with what remains. The tide went out and didn't come back. Not really, not the way it used to. But the waves still wash against the shore, even if they're smaller now. The water still moves, still flows, still follows the pull of the moon. The rhythm continues, diminished but persistent. And I still watch it, because that's what I've always done. That's all any of us can do. Watch the water, remember what was lost, and wonder what else the universe is hiding beneath surfaces we thought we understood. I got up from the dock and walked back to my truck. Tomorrow, I'd take the Anne-Marie out again, sail the shallow waters, feel the spray on my face. It wouldn't be the same. Nothing would ever be the same. But I'm a fisherman. I'm the son and grandson and great-grandson of fishermen. We've always adapted to what the sea gives us, made do with what remains, found ways to survive when the waters changed. The waters have changed again, more dramatically than anyone could have imagined. But we're still here, still watching, still sailing. The ocean kept its secret for billions of years. Now that secret is gone, risen into the sky and departed for destinations we'll never know. What's left behind is smaller, scarred, forever changed. But it's still the sea, and I'll keep sailing it until I can't sail anymore. That's the only answer I have, the only truth that matters. The tide went out. The tide didn't come back. But I'm still here, and tomorrow I'll go back to the water, because that's what fishermen do.